Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the Indian shuttler Kidambi Srikanth winning a historic silver medal at the World Badminton Championships. We also talk about the Competition Commission of India withdrawing its approval for Amazon's investment into future coupons. But first, we talk about the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The Omicron variant, which has proved to be a lot more transmissible than the Delta variant, has been spreading fast across the world. Countries like the UK are in fact seeing their biggest COVID-19 waves right now. This, experts feel, is in large part because of the Omicron variant. In this segment, Amitabh Sinha, Indian Express's resident editor from Pune, who has been reporting on the coronavirus numbers since the beginning, joins us to talk about the Omicron surge and what India is doing to prepare itself right now. So, Amitabh, the Omicron variant has been surging across the world, particularly in countries like the UK and even in the US. How many Omicron cases are these countries actually witnessing right now?
So, the biggest numbers are from the United Kingdom, where more than 20,000 cases have been reported till now, confirmed cases. The United States hasn't reported in that big numbers, but the numbers are rising there as well. And elsewhere in Europe, also, there are several countries in Europe which actually, in proportional terms, have a much higher prevalence of Omicron variant than even the UK. The Omicron variant cannot be confirmed only through the tests. The tests only give you whether a person is positive or not. And then for the Omicron infection, the sample has to be sent for genome sequencing. And that takes a little bit of time. Not all the countries have the same amount of capacities in terms of sequencing of genes. So the confirmed numbers, there is a time lag in those numbers coming out. The UK seems to be doing it much more rapidly than a lot of other countries. The capacities that we talked about are different in different countries. So we'll see the numbers coming out in due course.
So whatever Omicron numbers we are seeing right now, the actual numbers will be much higher then.
Will be much, much more higher. Yesterday, the UK's health minister, in fact, said that for Delta variant, for every known case, for every reported case, there were about 4 or 5 cases that were unreported. That used to be the case for Delta variant. For Omicron, this ratio would be much higher. For every reported Omicron case, there might be 10, 12, 15 cases that are unreported. And that's why what we are seeing, the numbers that we are seeing of the Omicron variant, are just a small fraction of the actual prevalence, not just in the UK, but in every other country as well. Even for a normal infections with the Delta variant or the earlier variants, the number of reported cases depends on the number of tests that you are doing. And as we have seen earlier during this pandemic as well, for every reported case, there were a large number of unreported cases. Even for the other variants, the previous ones. With Omicron, there is an additional thing that it's not even going to be confirmed through tests. You have to send it to the genome sequencing. Now, typically, genome sequencing, even in a country like India, which has fairly good capacity to create genomic profiles, we at the most would be doing 1% of the total reported cases. So if India is reporting 100 cases, for example, on any given day, for example, right now we are reporting about 8,000 cases in a day. So on any given day, out of those 8,000 cases, we would be sending roughly about 80 to 100 cases for genome sequencing. And of those 80 to 100, maybe we get about 10 cases or 12 cases which are Omicron variant. So there are several layers wherein the numbers can multiply. So what we are seeing right now is just a very small fraction of the Omicron variant being reported, not just in UK or in India, but across the world.
Okay, so countries like the UK are seeing a massive surge, but to what extent are people getting hospitalized there right now?
So the only good thing right now, and as I said, the situation is still evolving, is that the hospitalization rate still seems to be lower than what it was for the Delta variant. even though that number seems to be steadily rising as more and more Omicron variant cases are also being detected. But it's still comparatively lower than the previous wave. We do not have a very good number to say exactly how many people infected with Omicron variant are in hospitals in UK or elsewhere, but it seems to be significantly lower. There have been at least 7 confirmed deaths of people who were infected with Omicron variant. Though again, here we do not know for certain whether the Omicron infection was incidental to their deaths or it was the cause of their deaths. So that is still to be ascertained. But UK has confirmed 7 deaths, and those are the only confirmed deaths of Omicron infected patients anywhere in the world.
And when we talk about India, what kind of spread have we seen of the Omicron variant?
So, if you are referring to India, the numbers here, I mean, we don't know a lot about the spread of the Omicron variant given the numbers that are coming out right now. We roughly have about 150, 160 cases that are confirmed of the Omicron variant. Certainly not very huge compared to lots of other countries. But as I said earlier, this would be a very small fraction. But even if, say, the actual number is 10 times or 20 times, it's not of the same scale that we are seeing in UK or Denmark or Norway, a lot of other countries. Now numbers are going up fast in Italy, in Spain, US, of course, then the southern African countries. Now, South Africa is where it was discovered first, but a lot of countries neighboring South Africa, they are reporting a surge in numbers, also of the Omicron variant, but in general as well of COVID-19. So Botswana, Namibia, Eswatini, all of them are reporting a surge in numbers. By comparison, India is still relatively low numbers are coming out, but on a day-to-day comparison, we are seeing the numbers are rising. So earlier we were reporting 6 cases or 8 cases every day. Now cases have gone up to like 20, 25 every day. And this is only going to rise. And these numbers, if they remain stable at around 20, 25, it doesn't mean that only 20, 25 cases are being reported. We are handicapped by our capacity to create genome profiles. And that capacity is limited, right? So that we have to be careful about.
So what is the kind of thing that the Indian government is doing right now to tackle this? What kind of restrictions have been placed right now?
See, as of now, no additional measures seem to have been put in place, except for some states might have started further screening at the airports. I mean, even for foreign travelers at the airports, we have seen additional screening coming in from last month itself when Omicron was first reported. So that's certainly one additional measure that we are seeing that wasn't there till the second week of November. Progressively, we will also see some restrictions being put on interstate travel, and that would be done by the state government. Some of the states are already have stepped up the screening. So as of now, because we still do not have very alarming numbers, even though these numbers are just a tip of the iceberg, but because the numbers are not very alarming, we haven't put up the kind of restrictions that are already being put in place in Europe.
Right. And what kind of measures are we seeing in Europe right now then?
Okay, so some countries in Europe have already imposed a lockdown. The Netherlands imposed a lockdown Sunday. Then Norway had done partial lockdown earlier. In London, they have declared the spread of Omicron variant as a major incident. And when you declare a major incident, some things automatically kick in, some kind of restrictions, also some kind of emergency services automatically kick in. Now, the last time a major incident was declared in London was in January, February this year when UK was having its previous peak of cases. So after a gap of about 10 months, London is back in the same situation. And there are restrictions like in Netherlands, for example, they have said you can't have more than 2 guests coming over during the festival, except on holidays when you can probably have 4 guests, but not more than that. A lot of restrictions on public places, public eating out, assembly of people. And remember, this is the festive season, and this is a season which is people wait for the entire year in that part of the world.
Right. We have Christmas, which is just around the corner.
Yeah, this is the shopping season. This is the major festival season. So by their yardstick, it's a huge amount of restrictions that have been put in place.
So Amitabh, based on the numbers that we are seeing right now and what we know about the Omicron variant, what do experts say about whether it could lead to a massive third wave in India?
Okay, so in other countries, UK probably, for example, is already in the fourth wave, and they have already started to report the highest numbers ever. So the fourth wave in UK, which is the current wave, is higher than any of the previous waves. So for them, it's already there. For us, whether it will convert into a third wave or not, that is the question till now. There are a few positive things that are being pointed at in case of India specifically, that even if the numbers do go high, and because of the population in India, the potential for the numbers to go high is actually quite high that way. What we are seeing as of now, what is certainly known of this Omicron variant as of now, is that it has greater transmissibility and it has greater potential to evade the immune response. Now, the only positive thing that is being talked about in case of India is the fact that because the bulk of the Indian population has already been infected by the Delta variant, the severest wave of Delta variant anywhere in the world was in India, which was for us was our second wave. So a bulk of the population got infected during that time. And what we have seen with the Omicron variant till now is that the rate of hospitalization and the potential to cause severe diseases is slightly low, even in the other countries. In India, because the bulk of the population has already been infected by a variant which caused very severe disease, which was the Delta, there is a likelihood, and it's still a likelihood, we don't know the Omicron variant very well as of now, there is this likelihood that cases, even if when they go up, would not be very severe. Now, that's a plus. But in terms of the cases rising, if the Omicron variant continues to evade immunity as it seems to be doing elsewhere, we will see the numbers rise rapidly in India as well.
And next, we talk about the World Badminton Championships that ended on Sunday. During the international tournament, two Indian shuttlers won historic medals in the men's singles event. Kidambi Srikanth won a silver medal, while Lakshya Sen won a bronze. In this segment, Indian Express's Mihir Vasavada, who is the co-host of the Express Sports podcast, joins us now to talk about these wins and additionally to talk about a major disappointment. So Mihir, Kidambi Srikanth won a historic silver medal on Sunday after losing to Singapore's Loh Keen Yew in the finals. So could you first talk about the significance of him winning this medal?
To understand the significance of this win, Shashank, we need to go back into the past a bit, around 8 or 9 years ago. So Srikanth originally started off as a doubles player, and Pullela Gopichan, who was the chief coach of the Indian team at the time, he handpicked Srikanth and steered him towards a singles career. And since then, his whole momentum has been on this crazy upward swing. In 2013, he won his first title in Thailand. The first time the world actually noticed him was in 2014 when he defeated Lin Dan, a multiple-time world champion and a two-time Olympic champion from China, at his own backyard in the Chinese Super Series. That's when the Chinese took note of him. That's when the entire badminton world took note of him. And he continued this momentum. He won tournaments in Switzerland, in Australia, and France in the following years. And it really seemed like Srikanth would follow Gopichan and Prakash Padukone's footsteps and win something big in men's singles badminton. But then something snapped in him. In 2016 at the Olympics, he lost to Lin Dan in the quarterfinals. That, as our badminton writer Shivani noted, kind of pushed him to the brink of depression. He had a few wins here and there, and in 2017, for a very brief period, he became the world number one. But he had this injury on his right knee, and that kind of coincided with a massive drop in form as well. And Srikanth wasn't really the same player that we saw early on in his career. I mean, he started losing to very random players in the first and second rounds of tournaments. He lacked confidence. His game, which is rather very beautiful to watch even today, there seems something massively off in the way he played. And at the same time, there was this emergence of pretty great players from all around the world. You look at any part of badminton world, from Denmark or from Indonesia, China, Japan. You had this great assembly of players from all over the world, and Shrikant kind of got lost in all that. And his career kind of reached Nadir this year when he could not qualify for the Olympics, and eulogies were written about his career. And he's recovered from that, and now to reach the final of the World Championship, it is a very big deal. Even though this was a depleted field, it just shows that he's crossed a lot of mental barriers, and this should hopefully get his career back on track.
And so this win is kind of a resurgence for him. What stood out for you in his final match against Loh Kean Yew?
Well, his final match was a very tough one, as the scoreline suggests. He lost 15-21 and 20-22. So this Singaporean kid, Loh Kean Yew, he's extremely quick, extremely fast. I mean, he looked unplayable in this tournament. But for Shrikant, it was just the most important thing I felt was that self-belief kind of was missing in his game for a very long time. He seemed to be confident of playing his strokes. He could stretch rallies, he could expertly kind of maneuver points and make his opponents play the way. His net play was extremely good. These are the kind of things which made him great when he started off. These were the things that a lot of badminton fans started following Shrikant. They virtually fell in love with Shrikant's play because of these things. And confidence is a big thing in sport. When you're losing some of the things that you usually do, even in your sleep, you stop doing those things. And in this World Championship, a lot of things seem to have fallen together for Shrikant. I mean, he seems to be in good headspace, to be honest.
Okay, so we've been talking about Shrikant, but the other major development we saw this time was Lakshya Sen winning the bronze medal. Talk a bit about him and what this win means for him and the country.
Again, a very big deal. There is a lot of symbolism actually in Lakshya Sen's medal. Before him, the other Indian who won a bronze medal in the first appearance at the World Championship was a certain PV Sindhu. And now we know how PV Sindhu's career has taken off after that. And not to put pressure on the kid, but Lakshya Sen, there is a lot of expectations placed on him. He is Prakash Padukone's prodigy, picked up at a very young age. He got a very big support system around him. He's been given the kind of support that you would expect a champion player or a future champion to receive at his early years. So Lakshya Sen, there is a big punt taken on him at a very young age, and now he's starting to live up to those expectations. Again, there are riders in this World Championship because a lot of top players had pulled out. Some others had complained of fatigue because of the crowded calendar, and they hadn't participated. So there is a rider there, but then again, Lakshya Sen is a young player himself, and he beat very good quality players to reach the semi-finals. And the semi-final itself was steeped in symbolism because Shrikant, during his downfall, it was expected that Lakshya Sen would take over the baton from him and be the flag bearer of India's men's singles badminton. And in that match, Shrikant showed that he still remains this generation's best singles player. But Lakshya Sen had made all the right moves so far to show that he is the future.
And you mentioned PV Sindhu, and I suppose it was disheartening for many that she couldn't win a medal this time, which is sort of a rarity for Sindhu. She lost to the Chinese Taipei player Tai Tzu Ying, and this is something we've seen happen in the past as well. So talk a bit about this latest defeat and what does it tell us about Sindhu's ongoing struggles?
So Sindhu certainly has been struggling against Tai Tzu Ying. We saw that at the Olympics. We've seen that at previous tournaments as well. She certainly seems to have a Tai Tzu Ying problem. Now, there are two sides to PV Sindhu's performance. Of course, one is that she reached the quarterfinals and extending her crazy stretch. Since 2013, she's been reaching the quarterfinals of either the World Championship or the Olympics. And I can't remember in my memory any Indian player being so consistent. But at the same time, this is also the rare occasion when she has returned from a major tournament without a medal. Now, this is important from a bigger picture point of view because the level of competition in women's badminton right now is perhaps at the highest we've seen in years. And for Sindhu to kind of stay in the pack and to remain in the contention for major tournaments, for major medals, she'll have to figure out a way to beat Tai Zuying, which she clearly doesn't seem to have a plan right now. She has 2 or 3 months before another major tournament, the All England Championships, will take place. And depending on how the draw goes, Sindhu and Tai Zuying might play against each other once again. So we'll see if Sindhu by then has a strategy in place for Tai Zuying.
And in the end, we talk about the online retail giant Amazon. India's antitrust body, the Competition Commission of India, has withdrawn the approval it gave to Amazon for investing in Future Coupons Private Limited. This is an unprecedented move and could affect Amazon's plans to take over Future Group's retail assets before Reliance does. In this segment, Karunjit Singh, who writes for Indian Express's Business Bureau, joins us to talk about this move and how it could affect Amazon. So, Karunjit, could you first talk about the Future Coupons company and how much had Amazon invested in it?
So, Future Coupons is a business that basically markets and distributes gift cards, loyalty cards, and reward cards to corporate customers. I mean, for all of the Future Group brands. And Amazon had actually acquired a 49% stake in Future Coupons Private Limited for about 1,500 crore rupees. So the interesting thing about the deal that we've learned from the CCI orders is that actually Amazon paid a 25% premium for a certain strategic interest that they would have in the parent company of Future Coupons through the deal, which is Future Retail. So they would have a call option and other strategic rights that would basically give Amazon the right to potentially acquire Future Retail in any period between 3 years after the deal and 10 years after the deal. And another thing that this deal actually gave was Amazon a stake in Future Retail itself, because Future Coupons, even before the deal, had a stake in Future Retail, its parent company. And after the deal, it had a total stake of about 9.8%. So Amazon, as a result of having nearly half, had about an 4.8% stake in Future Retail itself. So the special right that Amazon would have under deal basically allowed them an option to not just acquire Future Retail at a time between 3 and 10 years after the transaction, but also would require that Amazon's consent be taken for any significant transfer of shares of Future Retail, the parent company of Future Coupons. And this is what has become a key issue when Reliance Industries, as we know, agreed to acquire the Future Group's retail assets, including Future Retail, in that 24,700 crore deal.
And Future Retail, of course, is the big supermarket company, right?
Yes, exactly. So Future Retail as a supermarket company has a lot of large brands like Big Bazaar, etc., that have a large presence across India. And this is also something that Amazon was very interested in acquiring in potentially getting into in the future when FDI rules are relaxed.
So through this deal, Amazon was kind of attempting to get ahead of Reliance, trying to acquire Future Retail and everything that comes under it. So why is it that now the Competition Commission of India has withdrawn its approval of Amazon's investment into Future Coupons?
So it seems from the order passed by the CCI at the time when they approved the investment in the first place that Amazon had said that Future Coupons held a potential for long-term value creation for its own business, and that Amazon could actually help strengthen the business relating to its marketing of corporate gift cards. What the CCI has found after reviewing, internal emails from Amazon and arguments that Amazon made before the Singapore International Arbitration Center, the body which has actually given Amazon a stay on the deal between the Future Group and Reliance because of the covenants that we discussed that Amazon had in the deal for their investment in Future Coupons. What they found is that Amazon has said that one of the key parts of this investment was the rights that it gave Amazon over Future Retail and any stake sale of Future Retail. And the CCI is basically contending that Amazon has suppressed this deliberately and suppressed the intention of getting a foot in the door in the Indian offline retail space when they'd actually initially sought approval from the CCI. In fact, we even have an email in the order, which an internal official of Amazon saying that, the laws in India currently don't permit foreign investment in offline retail companies. And this could change in 3 to 5 years as the government relaxes the norms. And at that point, Future Retail will be a very large asset with a pan-India footprint, and the possibility of greater control for Amazon would be a big asset. So based on this, the CCI has put its approval that it had given to the investment in abeyance and given Amazon an additional 60 days to file new information including the information that the CCI thinks that Amazon has suppressed in its previous submissions to the commission. And it's actually even fined Amazon 202 crore rupees for what they call a willful and deliberate suppression of material information.
So based on what happens, how much will this potentially impact the sale of Future Group's retail assets?
So the order is almost certainly going to be appealed before the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, which is the first appellate court, and maybe even the Supreme Court. And experts have said that, in fact, the CCI may not even have the power to revoke an approval at this stage, so long after it has been approved. And even Amazon, in fact, argued, besides the fact that they're saying that they were very forthright about all the documents, including all the rights that they would have in their submissions, they also said that the CCI does not actually have this power to revoke approval. But in case the order is upheld, it could mean that Amazon's investment in Future Coupons is voided, and therefore their rights or any rights that they had over Future Retail's business or any decisions that their consent would be needed for Future Retail's business could be revoked. And it could definitely harm their standing at the Singapore International Arbitration Center, which is where the case is right now. And we're all waiting for the next ruling from the Singapore International Arbitration Center on which way the case will go.
And Karanjit, could you give a sense of the kind of competition we have seen between Amazon and Reliance in the Indian market?
So as we've said, Amazon doesn't really have a presence in multi-brand retail offline because of FDI restrictions. So the key competition that comes is coming online, and Reliance has been pushing for a larger chunk of online retail spend through its Ajio portal. But this was more about the future. This whole tussle between Amazon and Reliance by proxy is for the future of the retail market in India. And Reliance already being basically the largest offline retail presence in India, Amazon could be said to not want potentially Reliance to have an even larger share of the market by acquiring such a large additional pan-India presence through the Future Group, and basically potentially precluding Amazon from getting the benefits from it. So Amazon was potentially thinking of having eventually Big Bazaar and other parts of the Future Group as even sellers on Amazon's portal. And what the Future Group's lawyers have even argued is that Amazon would maybe even rather have the Future Group's retail businesses shut down than to have them go to Reliance. So it's much more about the future of India's retail space and how much of it Amazon can potentially grab, and potentially preventing Reliance from getting maybe too much of a stranglehold in their view of the retail space.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.